on this Friday.
The delegate from Fairfax, Delegate Helmer, on this Friday.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise for a point of personal privilege.
The delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, late last night, Republicans realized the full MAGA agenda of ensuring that dangerous people can have access to dangerous weapons and making our families and our communities less safe. Republicans defeated bills brought forward by House Democrats to keep our communities safe. Bills that would keep firearms out of the hands of domestic abusers. Bills that ban the use of autoseers, that take a semi-automatic weapon and allow it to function as though it were automatic. Bills that would help police track violent criminals by ensuring that when a bullet is fired, we can track the firearm from which it was shot. They defeated a bill to stop students from bringing dangerous firearms onto the campus of UVA, even in the wake of a violent massacre. They defeated a bill that would require the safe storage of firearms to keep them away from children. They defeated a bill that would establish training courses so that if you're going to get a firearm, at least you know how to use it safely. They defeated a bill that would keep weapons of war like those I carried in Iraq and Afghanistan out of the hands of dangerous people and stop them from proliferating in our Commonwealth. Mr. Speaker, we hear a lot about thoughts and prayers. But I ask, what are you thinking about? What new ideas are you proposing except for more firearms, more guns, more death? Guns are the #1 leading cause of death of our children. And half of this body has decided to allow that to continue to be a reality. Mr. Speaker, every morning I wake up and think of my friends who died in uniform in Iraq because politicians didn't have the courage to stop that war. With too many of our children and family members dying from bullets, I ask that we all get the courage to do something different and keep our families and our communities safe. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The delegate from Culpeper, Delegate Freitas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for a point of personal privilege.
The delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, to anybody that's watching or listening, the rendition that you just heard has become all too familiar from some of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle. Not all of them. I want to make sure that that's understood. But some of them, because once again, it's the questioning of the intentions of people that you disagree with on policy. And I wonder sometimes, what would it look like if we decided to engage in that same sort of reasoning to our colleagues on the other side of the aisle? And to a point I already know, because anytime we ever get close, there's this righteous indignation with people running off the floor, requesting recesses so they can gather their composure and then come back and once again accuse us of being horrible people if we don't agree with them. I also served in Iraq. And apparently, the delegate and I learned two very, very different lessons. I learned the lesson of what happens when a government systematically disarms its people and leaves them completely vulnerable to both criminal and terrorist activity. It's one of the reasons why when we were over in Iraq, we actually went to the trouble of making sure that they did have the ability to defend themselves, because we knew we couldn't always be there, that the Iraqi army couldn't always be there, that the Iraqi police couldn't always be there. And we understood because we saw the results of what happened when people were actually empowered to be able to defend themselves. Now, I understand that our colleagues on the other side of the aisle take the position that when someone abuses their right, that perhaps the best way to address that is to diminish the rights of everybody that didn't abuse it, in the hopes that maybe it will somehow deter the person that has already made up the decision to engage in a violent act. That's a claim, that's a hope. but here's what you're actually doing. And this part is very, very important. Because if we do actually believe in a free country, then we need to understand something about rights and the nature of them. If you tell a bunch of people who did nothing wrong, law-abiding people, people who have used a firearm in order to defend themselves, if you tell them we're going to make it more difficult for you to get it, or we're just going to ban them outright, or, as the delegates bill did, we're going to make you a felon and take away not only your gun rights, but your voting rights if you have so much as a 15-round magazine. If you're going to tell them that, then understand something. You will guaranteed make it more difficult for those people to be able to defend themselves. They will be completely reliant upon the government to provide for their security. So when someone is kicking in their door, when someone is robbing their store, when the domestic abuser comes back, they will have to call the police and patiently wait. And if the police don't get there in time, I guess our colleagues on the other side of the aisle will be able to say, well, at least there wasn't any gun violence. Because let's understand something about the way that they actually gather their statistics, and this is very important to understand. If you did have a situation where a woman had a firearm in order to protect herself because she has a husband or a boyfriend that is beating her, and he shows up one night drunk and she shoots and kills him, that will go into the general statistics of gun violence. Now you take the gun away from her, he shows up, beats her to death, their gun violence statistics just improved, didn't they? Because the gun wasn't used. What we are interested in on this side of the aisle is confronting violent people that engage in violent acts against innocent people. That's why you will see several bills today and through the rest of this session, making sure that people that repeatedly break the law, whether they use a gun, a knife, their fists, a car, we don't care. If you're a violent person and you're perpetrating violence against an innocent person, we want you to be captured, prosecuted, and go to jail for a long time. We don't want them to get out on all kinds of credits like some of our friends on the other side of the aisle do. So this idea that we have no response to violence, to gun violence, is verifiably false, and yet it is repeated over and over and over again. Because I honestly believe at this point, our colleagues on the other side of the aisle don't want to have an honest debate about this. What they want to do is try to convince anybody that's watching that we're just evil, mean, bad people. And there's no reason to listen to an argument from an evil, mean, bad person, right? It's just purely ad hominem attack, dressed up as an argument. That's all it is. Because the idea, the offensive notion that the people on this side have never been touched by violence, by gun violence, that we don't understand that, is absurd and, again, verifiably false. The difference is that our solution is when someone does a bad thing, we go after the action, we go after the person, we don't go after the rights of innocent people who did nothing wrong and those who just want to defend themselves. So that is the distinction here. It is not a question of one side wanting to do something and the other side wanting to do nothing. It's a question like so many other things. Are we going to do everything we can to protect people in a free society and to allow them the ability to protect themselves, or are we going to summarily disarm, punish, and felonize them, leaving them sometimes at the mercy of their attacker, all so that you can come back here later and say, well, gosh, at least we did something. After all, the gun violence statistics are down. Well, I have news for you. When the hundreds of thousands of Americans every year who use a firearm, sometimes all they have to do is show it. Sometimes they have to actually use it. When those people are going to be denied their rights by your policies, you bear far more responsibility for what happens to them than somebody that decides to abuse their rights. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The delegate from Prince William, Delegate Munden King.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for a point of personal privilege.
The delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, I sat in a committee room for 4 hours yesterday. I really didn't plan to say much more. but as the wife of someone who gets up every single day and puts on a uniform to go out and protect and serve, to hear someone say, if the police don't arrive in time, what is a person supposed to do? Well, let me tell you, in my community, a few weeks ago, when a gunman went into a house and shot teenagers and killed a 3-year-old, the police arrived within 2 minutes. That didn't save that 3-year-old baby's life. Why should anyone be allowed to have a higher caliber, more powerful weapon than my husband, who goes out every day in uniform and has trained and served his community with pride for years? Is no excuse for inaction. So to sit in this room and lecture and value and devalue the lives of those who have been harmed by gun violence is harmful. To sit in this room and say, oh, they run out of the room. You know why? Because they have been impacted by gun violence. They are traumatized by gun violence. They have held the hands of family members crying who will never see their children, family members, loved ones again. They matter. Running to get themselves together. Who wants to cry tears again in front of their colleagues because they are so hurt by the dehumanization of victims of gun violence? Not one of us. So, Mr. Speaker, I say this. We have much debate, and we can agree to disagree. But let's please honor and revere our law enforcement and what they do, what they bring to the table, how they show up, how highly trained they are. And let's humanize, love, and provide some compassion to those of us in this room who still understands what it feels like to be a victim of gun violence. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The delegate from Virginia Beach, Delegate Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for a point of personal privilege.
The delegate has the floor.
If only there was a law that we couldn't murder people, that would solve the problem. If only there was a law that you couldn't bring a gun into a particular zone, that would solve the problem. If only there was a law that teachers were supposed to report students with guns to administrators and administrators were supposed to do something about it, that would be a way to solve the problem. But Mr. Speaker, we have all of those laws. The UVA shooting happened in a gun-free zone. How many more laws do we intend to pass that we expect criminals who are going to commit violence to obey? In Newport News, the 6-year-old, took a gun from his parent. There was a law passed here 2 years ago that said you're supposed to lock your guns up, and it's a crime not to. But yet, this 6-year-old brings a gun to school. A teacher says, hey, I think this kid has a gun to administration. A second teacher says, I think this kid has a gun. A sixth grader at recess goes to his teacher and says, crying, this kid showed the gun to me and I'm scared because he said he would shoot me if I told anyone. And yet they did nothing. And then he shot his teacher. The law that stopped that reporting was a law that the other side of the aisle passed in 2020, which said that we're going to not deal with crimes of violence, crimes of guns. We're not going to report those up the chain because that affects the statistics of the school. And the only way we're going to show that our policies are working is if we suppress the actual statistics. What person in their right mind wouldn't have taken that 6-year-old out of that classroom after the 6-year-old came crying and said, he's going to shoot me, I saw the gun? What person wouldn't have evacuated that school right then? The principal who didn't want to have that statistic on his record because of the policies that the other side of the aisle passed. My goodness, the laws, only if we do this, that will stop. Only if we do that, that will stop. None of it is going to stop by a law that we pass up here and we expect criminals or criminality to obey. Mr. Speaker, if there was a bill that we could pass in this body that would guarantee that no school teacher, no child would ever be shot in a school again, that would guarantee that, everybody would be for that. But what we're doing is we are exactly what the delegate from Culpeper is saying. We are taking away individual rights because of criminal actors, and it's not working. So when you're talking to us about, well, if we had this bill, a bill that's coming up next week, to make it a crime to allow your gun to be unsecured with your child getting a hold of it. If only that were the law, then we would have changed it. That is the law, and it didn't change it. So I just ask and implore. I believe that some of you on the other side of the aisle truly want to find a solution here. But trying to pass laws that are predicated on criminals obeying them as the solution and then calling us bad and evil people for not passing them is not the right approach. Focus on why. Why did the 6-year-old bring that gun to school? Why did the administrators not do something about it? Why did UVA not do something about the kid when they knew he had a problem with a concealed weapon in his dorm room? Why? Why? Quit punishing everybody else and let's start asking those questions. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
People are popping up in the queue, so I'm going to have the gentleman from Fairfax give his "we're running out of time" speech at this point. The delegate from Fairfax, Delegate Simon.
Mr. Speaker, members of the House, I rise for a point of personal privilege.
The delegate has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, we're running out of time. I've got this highlighted. Mr. Speaker, members of the House, I want to say this has been an interesting debate to watch unfold, and we've got, I think both sides have pretty well articulated what the positions are and the different philosophical approaches to this issue of gun violence and a number of the issues that plague us. And I think ultimately it's up to the voters of Virginia to be able to decide which philosophy they align with. And so, Mr. Speaker, that's really what has me concerned about the fact that we're running out of time, because we've got bills on gun violence prevention and well, all kinds of violence prevention, according to the delegate from Culpeper. I mean, we have a bill that would allow carrying a concealed handgun without a permit anywhere. Why should the government be able to tell you that you need a concealed handgun or not? We've got bills that would allow you to carry firearms in schools and other places because we shouldn't have gun-free zones. We've got those bills that have been introduced. Wouldn't it be great if we had an opportunity to vote on those, so that the voters who are going to be deciding between that philosophy and this philosophy would have an opportunity to see how we all vote on those issues, right? And then we'll see who they agree with and who's right and who's wrong. And then we'd have an opportunity for democracy to do what it's supposed to do. And for people to be able to know where we stand on these issues, see how we vote on these issues, and then they can choose and they can decide, and then maybe we can move forward, break the logjam over these issues, Mr. Speaker. And it's not just guns, it's abortion. It's when life begins, right? I understand that the Speaker, as he said earlier, can count to 51 and can count to 21, and so can I. But the reason we put these bills in, the reason we have these debates, the reason we go through this is so that we can vote on these things, and then the people can decide, is Delegate Freitas right? Is Delegate Helmer or Delegate King right? Who's got the right approach? Who do we want to lead our Commonwealth forward on these issues? And Mr. Speaker, we're running out of time to give the people that information, to get these things to a place where they can get voted on so that people can decide which way they want to go. So, Mr. Speaker, we are running out of time. You have the duty under our rules to refer these bills to committees. I hope that you'll do so soon so we can get these to the floor. We can all vote on them. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The delegate from Botetourt, Delegate Head.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for a point of personal privilege.
The delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, earlier this week, we received a report from the Attorney General concluding his investigation into the parole board. And I know that you and many other members of this body have been asked by the press what we make of it. Well, this side of the aisle has been reticent to speak about this report, and for good reason. First, we most practically wanted to read it. Second, we wanted to take some time to digest what we've read. And said simply, it's bad. Now, members on the other side of the aisle didn't feel the need to pause before commenting. It's all politics, said one member of the other party. Another member said, quote, this idea that there's probably a lot of criminal stuff that's gone on, but we just can't charge any of it because the statute of limitations ran out, it's a political tool. It's more political theater. I don't think there's any real there. End quote. I'm not surprised, Mr. Speaker. From the moment this scandal broke in the spring of 2020, the other side of the aisle downplayed it. Republicans just don't like parole, they argued. It's a witch hunt. It's much ado about nothing. Well, Mr. Speaker, to paraphrase the great Randy Travis, we told you so. This report is horrifying. There's a reason it runs on for as long as it does. There were many things deeply wrong at the Virginia Parole Board before Governor Youngkin cleaned house. Some particularly egregious things that stand out to me are the lack of regard for victims. For example, when a rapist was to be released on parole, then Chair Adrienne Bennett made her own personal policy to not contact the victims despite what the law said. This is from the report. Board employee Crystal Noakes, who often assisted with victim contact efforts, confirmed Chair Bennett's policy in an interview. Noakes told OAG investigators that Chair Bennett would make up policies that were convenient, and Bennett's policies regarding rape victims was that if it's a rape victim, don't traumatize the victim by contacting them. Noakes reiterated that, I just know the way Adrienne worked, and she would kind of make up her own rules as she went along. Analysis of the parole board's decisions in March and April of 2020 confirms the lack of victim contact efforts. The cases of convicted rapists Anthony Eugene, Clinton Jacobs, Aubrey Lawrence, Charles Shepard, Robert Day, William Whitaker, and Harold Martin are illustrative. I cannot imagine what a rape victim would go through if the first time they found out about the release of their attacker was encountering them in public. The notification law is in place for a reason, and Chair Bennett just ignored it. There are other egregious things in this document, that are documented in this report, but I want to zoom in on one case, and that's the one of Henry Holmes. Henry Holmes was convicted of 3 armed robberies, which happened in 1996. Focus on that year, 1996. In 2000, he was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms. He was granted parole by Chair Bennett and the board. Now, that's par for the course for this board. That's what they did. They let dangerous felons out on parole all the time. But what makes it egregious is that by law, Mr. Holmes was not eligible for parole. Mr. Speaker, this General Assembly abolished parole in 1995. Crimes committed after that date were not eligible for parole. But Bennett and the board simply ignored the law and let Mr. Holmes walk free. And they did it again and again and again. Bennett didn't like the General Assembly's 3 strikes law and wanted it to be much more lenient. The Secretary of Public Safety and Homeland Security told her that she needed to get this General Assembly to change the law. A bill came forward from Senator Surville, and it died. The law did not change, but Chair Bennett simply read the law to mean what she wanted it to mean regardless, and opened the prison doors for more people who were simply not eligible. In other cases, there were court orders denying parole to inmates. She ignored them and granted parole anyway. Mr. Speaker, this General Assembly makes the laws of the Commonwealth. Those who serve the public take an oath to follow them. Mr. Speaker, this House has some very important decisions to make in the very near future regarding this report. I would hope Judge Bennett would resign, as she should, and make those decisions unnecessary. Nonetheless, I implore all of my colleagues, read the report, don't dismiss it, ask questions, and when the time comes, do the right thing. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The delegate from, yes. The delegate from Prince William, Delegate Munden King.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is it possible to go back to the first morning hour for the purpose of an introduction?
The delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today in the gallery, we have with us the Virginia Dental Hygienists Association. They are visiting the Capitol today to advocate for preventative care, and I ask my colleagues to join me in welcoming them to the House of Delegates today.
The delegate from Newport News, Delegate Price.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for a point of personal privilege.
The delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I realize that it's Friday, so I will be brief, because every Friday, we all look forward to going home. So let me tell you a little bit about my home. Now, on this floor, Newport News has been brought up twice now in order to make political points that fly directly in the face of the people that are asking for our help to have safer neighborhoods. A tragedy where a system let down a teacher and a student is being kicked around for political points. But what I do know is that neither of you have come to Newport News to ask them what they want. And you get up here and you lecture us about what's best for them. Let me tell you what could have helped. This morning, on behalf of Newport News Public Schools, I brought forward a bill that would have added Newport News to the list of localities that, should the voters choose to increase their own taxes for school construction, that it would happen. The schools that we have were old when I was in them. They are not up to the safety measures that some of y'all's new pretty schools are. And they were asking for a tool of their own money that would not cost the state anything. And what I received from one of the speakers this morning that wants to bring up the situation in Newport News was an anti-democratic rant about taxes. So please do not lecture me on what my home needs when you every day vote against bills that the educators are asking for support to keep their kids safe and to stay safe themselves. So the next time someone chooses to speak up for Newport News, I would love to hear that you heard it from them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The members are reminded to address their comments to the chair. You're supposed to yell at me about them. Okay, I'll take it. The delegate from Charlottesville, Delegate Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for a point of personal privilege.
The delegate has the floor.
And I will follow your instruction, Mr. Speaker.
I'm ready for it. I'm ready. Brace myself.
Mr. Speaker, I know the delegate from Culpeper and I spar sometimes on this floor, but we share a lot of values. And one of those is that we value a good debate. And that's why I'm so sad to hear today that he wants to have a debate about gun safety. Because there's maybe no one in this body who has more power to give us all that debate than he does. Because he's the chair of the subcommittee that heard all those firearm bills last night. And we heard more debate from him this morning on this floor than we did last night sitting in House Room 1. What we saw last night over and over was testimony from gun safety advocates, from law enforcement officers themselves about why they wanted these practical gun safety measures. And then we saw over and over members of your party move to table that bill. And what we heard over and over from the delegate from Culpeper is that a motion to table is a non-debatable motion. And so none of the members of the committee who voted to kill those bills could take the time to express their views. We heard nothing from them last night about why they voted over and over not to pass measures to make kids safer when parents lock up their firearms, or to ban the use of those high-capacity magazines, those weapons of war. We heard nothing about any of that. We could have had that debate last night, and we didn't. But I will remind this body that the good thing about a motion to table is that bills that are put on the table can be taken back off. And that means all of those good, thoughtful gun safety bills are sitting right there on the delegate from Culpeper's desk. And so if he wants to have that debate, we can all come back next week and do it again. He can take them off the table, and we can talk about them and give them the careful deliberation they deserve. In fact, if we want to talk about them on this floor, where the cameras and the lights are in full effect, we could even join in a motion to discharge them from those committees. Bring them up to the floor. Put us all 100 on the record. Let's have that debate right here. We can do that. That's within our power. So I would like to accept the delegate from Culpeper's charge to have that debate. We can do it here under the brightest lights, because I think that's what the people of Virginia deserve. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The clerk will call the calendar.
Calendar for today, Friday, January 27th, 2023. House bills on third reading, uncontested calendar, approximately 3 dozen bills in that category. Beginning on page 1 of the printed calendar, House Bill 1385. Continuing page 2, continuing with the uncontested third reading block, House Bills 1404, 1416, 1423, 1425, 1440. House Bill 1514 at the bottom of page 3 has been removed from the block and by for the day. Therefore, continuing with the block, top of page 4. House Bills 1541, 1554, 1581, 1583, 1590, 1629. Turn to page 6. House Bills 1687, 1701, 1706, 1713, 1715, 1757. Continuing with the House Bills third reading, uncontested block, top of page 8. House Bill 1838, 1908, 1943, 1972, 1991, 2012. Continuing with the block, page 10. House Bills 2017, 2020, 2032, 2054, 2105, 2124. And, Mr. Speaker, rounding out House Bills third reading, uncontested block, top of page 12. House Bills 2128, 2221, and House Bill 2323.
Shall the bills pass?
Oh, and overall, there's even one more. Over on page 13, House Bill 2343. I apologize.
Shall the bills pass? Mr. Clerk?
Delegate McQuinn?
Aye.
And Delegate Ransom?
Yes.
The clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 98, no 0.
Ayes 98, no 0. The bills pass.